In the shadowed halls of Renaissance Florence, where whispers carried more weight than gold and silence could topple kingdoms, Niccolò Machiavelli understood a truth that would echo through centuries: power belongs not to those who speak loudest, but to those who master the art of strategic silence. The courtiers who filled the air with endless chatter were mere pawns. The true players sat quietly in the corners, observing, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Duke of Milan learned this lesson too late. His court was famous for its elaborate speeches, its theatrical displays of wealth and influence. Every decision was announced with fanfare, every strategy proclaimed from the rooftops. Yet when the French armies approached his gates, all his grand proclamations meant nothing. He had revealed his hand too often, shown his weakness through constant need for validation. His enemies knew exactly where to strike because he had told them everything they needed to know. Contrast this with Lorenzo de' Medici, who built an empire not through boastful declarations but through the careful cultivation of mystery. When rivals attempted to gauge his intentions, they found only enigma. His silence was not emptiness, it was fullness contained, power held in reserve like a drawn bow. Every word he chose not to speak was a weapon kept sharp for the moment it would be needed most. The psychological mechanism behind silence as power operates on multiple levels. When we speak, we reveal our thoughts, our fears, our desires. Each word is intelligence given freely to potential enemies. But silence creates a void that others feel compelled to fill. In negotiations, the party who speaks first often loses. They reveal their position, their desperation, their limits. The silent party gathers this information while revealing nothing of their own hand. Consider the merchant prince who controlled the spice trade through 3 continents. His competitors knew him as a man of few words, but those words carried absolute weight. When he finally spoke in the trading halls of Venice, conversation stopped. His silence had created such scarcity of his opinions that when they were offered, they commanded premium attention. He understood that in a world drowning in noise, silence becomes the most precious commodity. The modern application of this principle extends far beyond medieval courts. In boardrooms where executives compete for dominance, the one who speaks least often wields most influence. They allow others to expose their strategies, reveal their insecurities, demonstrate their limitations. Meanwhile, the silent observer catalogues every weakness, every opportunity, every potential alliance. When they finally act, their move is calculated with precision impossible for those who have been constantly broadcasting their intentions. But true silence is not mere absence of speech, it is presence of purpose. The weak remain quiet because they have nothing to say, the powerful remain quiet because they have everything to say and choose the perfect moment to say it. This discretion becomes a form of psychological leverage. Others begin to project onto the silent figure whatever they fear most or desire most. They see in the silence either approval or disapproval, alliance or threat, depending on their own vulnerabilities. The courtier who mastered this art would arrive at state functions and position himself where he could observe all interactions while engaging in none. Noble families would approach him, trying to determine his loyalties, his plans, his assessments of various political developments. His responses were minimal: a nod here, a raised eyebrow there, a slight smile that could mean anything or nothing. By the evening's end, he possessed detailed intelligence about every major player while revealing nothing of his own position. This accumulation of information while maintaining opacity creates compound advantages over time. Others must make decisions based on incomplete information about your capabilities and intentions, while you operate with increasingly complete intelligence about theirs. The silent party develops what military strategists call information asymmetry, a decisive advantage in any conflict. The hunger that drives this strategic silence is not the desperate need of the weak, but the calculated appetite of the predator. It is hunger for opportunity, for advantage, for the perfect moment to strike. This hunger sharpens perception, heightens awareness, creates the patient intensity that separates true power from mere position. In the trading houses of medieval Europe, the merchants who accumulated vast fortunes were those who could wait. When others grew impatient and made premature moves, the patient hunter struck at precisely the moment when maximum advantage could be gained. Their hunger was not for immediate gratification but for absolute victory. This delayed gratification became a competitive weapon more powerful than any sword. The weak self that must be destroyed is the part that seeks constant validation through speech, that needs to prove its worth through continuous proclamation of its achievements and intentions. This weak self is addicted to the immediate gratification of being heard, being acknowledged, being responded to. But every word spoken for validation is power hemorrhaged, opportunity squandered, advantage surrendered. The transformation from this weak, needy self to the powerful, silent observer requires a fundamental shift in motivation. Instead of speaking to be heard, one learns to listen to understand. Instead of revealing to impress, one learns to conceal to protect. Instead of reacting immediately, one learns to respond strategically. This is not mere behavioral modification, it is psychological reconstruction at the deepest level. The man who has destroyed his weak self becomes a living weapon of observation and calculation. His presence alone begins to affect the behavior of others. They become self-conscious under his gaze, uncertain about his assessment, eager to win his approval or avoid his disapproval. This psychological pressure often causes them to make mistakes, to reveal information they intended to keep hidden, to act against their own best interests. In the competitive landscape of any era, this dynamic creates enormous advantages. While others exhaust themselves in constant performance and positioning, the strategically silent accumulate strength, intelligence, and opportunity. They become the center around which others orbit, not through magnetic attraction but through the gravitational pull of contained power. The Duke of Ferrara exemplified this principle when faced with invasion from multiple directions. Rather than responding to each threat with immediate military action or diplomatic protests, he withdrew into what appeared to be weakness but was actually the deepest form of strength. His enemies, unsure of his capabilities and intentions, began to suspect traps where none existed, to imagine alliances that were never formed, to hesitate when they should have acted decisively. His silence became a psychological weapon more effective than any army. This strategic use of silence extends beyond individual interactions to the management of entire organizations and movements. The leader who speaks constantly about plans, goals, and strategies gives competitors roadmaps for opposition. The leader who acts decisively while maintaining strategic opacity forces opponents to react to accomplished facts rather than preventing planned actions. But, perhaps most importantly, silence becomes a tool for self-transformation. In the absence of constant external validation through speech, one is forced to develop internal standards of worth and achievement. This internal orientation creates independence from the opinions and approval of others, the ultimate source of personal power. When validation comes from within rather than from others, it cannot be withheld or withdrawn as leverage against you. The hunger that accompanies this transformation is the appetite for mastery rather than approval. It seeks not the temporary satisfaction of being heard but the permanent advantage of understanding. This hunger drives continuous learning, constant observation, relentless improvement. It becomes a source of energy rather than a drain on resources. The practical application of these principles requires careful calibration. Strategic silence is not sullen withdrawal or antisocial isolation. It is engaged observation, active listening, deliberate discretion. The powerful silent observer participates fully in every interaction while revealing nothing unnecessary about their own position or intentions. They encourage others to speak while maintaining their own strategic opacity. This creates a feedback loop where the silent party's power grows through each interaction while others' power diminishes through overexposure. The accumulation of intelligence, the conservation of energy, the maintenance of mystery all combine to create compound advantages that multiply over time. The gap between the strategic observer and the compulsive revealer widens with each passing day until it becomes an unbridgeable chasm of capability and influence. Part 2, The Alchemy of Desire and Calculation. The hunger that transforms men from servants of circumstance into masters of fate is not the base craving of the desperate, but the refined appetite of the predator who has learned to feast on opportunity itself. In the blood-soaked politics of Renaissance Italy, Machiavelli witnessed how desire, properly channeled, becomes the most potent force for reshaping reality according to one's will. The weak hunger for comfort, security, approval from others. The strong hunger for dominion, for the moment when all variables align and victory becomes inevitable. Francesco Sforza understood this distinction when he transformed himself from a mercenary's bastard son into the Duke of Milan.
His hunger was not for the trappings of nobility, those could be seized by any successful bandit.
His hunger was for the absolute command of circumstances, for the power to remake the world according to his vision. Every alliance he forged, every battle he fought, every marriage he arranged served this single, burning purpose. His contemporaries saw opportunism. Machiavelli recognized the systematic application of desire as leverage. The weak man's hunger makes him predictable. He seeks the same things as every other weak man: safety, comfort, recognition, the path of least resistance. This predictability becomes his chains. Enemies can anticipate his moves because his desires follow conventional patterns. He can be controlled through the simple expedient of threatening what he values or promising what he craves. His hunger has made him a slave to those clever enough to manipulate his appetites. But the man who has learned to hunger for power itself, not its symptoms or symbols, but its essence, becomes unpredictable and, therefore, uncontrollable. His desires no longer follow conventional patterns because he has transcended conventional limitations. While others seek to avoid risk, he seeks to master it. While others pursue security, he pursues opportunity. While others fear change, he engineers it. This transformation of desire from weakness into weapon requires understanding hunger as leverage, not something that controls you, but something you control and deploy strategically. The merchant princes of Florence discovered this when they realized that their desire for wealth could be leveraged into desire for influence, which could be leveraged into desire for political control, which could be leveraged into the ability to reshape entire economies according to their will. The key insight is that hunger, properly directed, becomes renewable energy. Unlike material resources that are consumed when used, strategic hunger grows stronger through exercise. The man who successfully leverages his desire for power into actual power finds that his appetite for greater power increases rather than diminishes. This creates an upward spiral of capability and ambition that can transcend any external limitation. Consider how Cesare Borgia transformed his illegitimate birth from disadvantage into advantage through the careful cultivation of hunger. Where others might have accepted their limitations, he developed an appetite for what seemed impossible. This hunger drove him to study every aspect of power acquisition and maintenance with religious intensity. He analyzed successful rulers, dissected failed rebellions, mapped the psychology of loyalty and betrayal. His hunger became a research program, and his research became a conquest manual. The psychological mechanism underlying this transformation involves converting reactive desire into proactive design. Most people experience hunger as something that happens to them. They become hungry for things, and this hunger drives their behavior in predictable patterns. But the sophisticated practitioner learns to design their own hungers, to cultivate specific desires that serve strategic purposes rather than merely responding to environmental stimuli. This designed hunger operates like compound interest in the realm of psychology. Each successful application of strategic desire creates new capabilities and opportunities, which enable more sophisticated applications, which create even greater capabilities and opportunities. The man who successfully leverages his hunger for knowledge into actual expertise can then leverage that expertise into influence, which can be leveraged into position, which can be leveraged into the power to reshape entire fields of knowledge according to his vision. The process begins with the recognition that all human behavior ultimately stems from desire, the desire to gain something valued or avoid something feared. Most people remain unconscious of this fundamental driver, which means they can be controlled by anyone sophisticated enough to understand and manipulate their desire patterns. But the person who becomes fully conscious of their own desire mechanisms gains the ability to reprogram them at will. This reprogramming involves a systematic destruction of socially conditioned desires in favor of strategically chosen hungers. Society conditions people to want approval, security, comfort, fairness, all desires that serve social stability rather than individual power. The person serious about claiming their destiny must identify and eliminate these externally imposed desires, replacing them with internally generated hungers that serve their own strategic purposes. The Duke of Urbino demonstrated this principle when he systematically eliminated his desire for his subjects' love in favor of his hunger for their respect and fear. Love could be withdrawn when circumstances changed. Respect and fear, properly cultivated, became self-reinforcing systems that served his power regardless of external circumstances. This transformation required destroying the part of himself that needed to be liked and replacing it with the part that needed to be effective.
This process of desire reconstruction extends beyond simple goal setting or positive thinking. It involves fundamental alterations to the neural patterns that generate motivation and drive behavior.
The weak self operates on externally validated desires, wanting things because others value them, avoiding things because others disapprove of them.
The strong self operates on internally generated hungers, wanting things because they serve strategic purposes, avoiding things because they represent inefficient uses of energy and attention. The practical application of this principle requires systematic examination of every desire and its source. Desires that originated from social conditioning must be questioned and either eliminated or consciously chosen. Desires that serve strategic purposes must be amplified and refined.
Desires that create dependencies on others must be replaced with desires that create independence and self-sufficiency. The merchant who transformed a small family business into a commercial empire accomplished this by systematically eliminating his desire for quick profits in favor of his hunger for market dominance. Quick profits could be made by anyone with modest skills. Market dominance required capabilities that few possessed. By redirecting his motivational energy toward the more difficult but more rewarding goal, he transformed himself from a small-time trader into an economic force capable of influencing entire industries. This transformation of hunger into leverage operates through multiple mechanisms simultaneously. First, it eliminates the predictability that comes from conventional desires, making it impossible for competitors to anticipate or counter your moves. Second, it creates motivation powerful enough to sustain effort through the inevitable obstacles and setbacks that accompany any significant achievement. Third, it attracts the attention and respect of others who recognize the rare quality of strategic purpose. The psychological effects of this transformation extend far beyond simple goal achievement. When a person successfully converts their random, socially conditioned desires into strategically chosen hungers, they experience a fundamental shift in their relationship to reality. Instead of feeling like victims of circumstance who must adapt to whatever situations they encounter, they begin to feel like architects of circumstance who can design situations according to their specifications. This shift from reactive to creative relationship with reality represents the core of what Machiavelli understood about power. Power is not merely the ability to get what you want within existing circumstances, it is the ability to create circumstances that make what you want inevitable. This requires hunger sophisticated enough to encompass not just desired outcomes but the entire causal chain that produces those outcomes. The statesman who mastered this principle could create political situations where his enemies would be forced to choose between options that all served his interests. His hunger was not merely for political victory but for the systematic arrangement of circumstances that would make political victory the only possible outcome. This required designing desires complex enough to encompass multiple levels of causation and sophisticated enough to account for the psychological patterns of all major players. The culmination of this process is the development of what might be called meta-hunger, desire for the power to control desire itself. This represents the highest form of strategic appetite, where one hungers not merely for specific outcomes but for the capability to generate whatever hungers will be most useful in future situations. This meta-level control of motivation becomes the ultimate leverage, enabling adaptation to any circumstances while maintaining strategic purpose. The man who has achieved this level of desire mastery becomes essentially unconquerable because he cannot be controlled through manipulation of his appetites. His hungers are self-generated and strategically chosen rather than externally imposed and unconsciously accepted. This makes him immune to the primary method by which the weak are controlled and gives him the primary method by which the strong control others. But, perhaps most importantly, this transformation of hunger into leverage creates what military strategists call force multiplication. Each unit of energy invested in pursuit of strategically designed desires produces multiple units of result because the desires themselves have been optimized for maximum effect. This efficiency advantage compounds over time, creating exponential rather than linear progress toward whatever outcomes have been chosen. The weak man exhausts himself pursuing desires that work against each other or serve purposes other than his own advancement. The strong man experiences increasing energy and capability because all his desires have been aligned to serve a coherent strategic purpose. His hunger becomes fuel for achievement rather than drain on achievement, creating a self-reinforcing system of motivation and accomplishment that can overcome any external obstacle. Part 3, The Forge of Invulnerable Character. The final transformation that separates the eternal ruler from the temporary occupant of power lies in the deliberate destruction of every aspect of character that can be exploited by enemies or corrupted by circumstances.
This is not mere self-improvement or character development, it is strategic self-reconstruction aimed at creating a form of human being that cannot be conquered because there are no remaining vulnerabilities for conquest to exploit.
When Machiavelli observed the rise and fall of princes across Europe, he noticed that defeat almost always came from within before it manifested without. The conqueror who fell to corruption was first corrupted internally by his own weaknesses. The strategist who was outmaneuvered was first betrayed by his own predictable patterns of thinking and feeling.
The leader who was overthrown was first undermined by character flaws that his enemies learned to exploit with systematic precision.
The Duke of Bourges provides the perfect case study in this principle. His military skills were exceptional, his political acumen sophisticated, his strategic vision comprehensive. Yet he was ultimately destroyed not by superior opponents but by his own remaining vulnerabilities, his need for his father's approval, his tendency toward excess when victory seemed certain, his inability to maintain cold calculation when personally insulted. These character weaknesses became weapons in his enemies' hands more powerful than any army they could field against him. The transformation from vulnerable to invulnerable character begins with ruthless self-examination aimed at identifying every possible avenue of attack against one's own psychology. This requires the ability to see oneself as an enemy would see you, not with the forgiving eyes of self-love, but with the calculating assessment of one seeking weaknesses to exploit. Every emotional reaction that can be predicted becomes a lever for manipulation. Every fear that can be triggered becomes a tool for control. Every desire that can be frustrated becomes a source of psychological leverage for opponents. The process resembles the systematic testing of a fortress for structural weaknesses, except the fortress being tested is one's own mind and character. Where physical fortifications have walls that can be breached and gates that can be forced, psychological fortifications have emotional triggers, cognitive biases, moral certainties, and behavioral patterns. The sophisticated opponent will probe each of these systematically until they discover the particular combination of pressures that can compromise your decision-making capability.
Consider how the master manipulators of the Medici court operated.
They would study their targets for months, cataloging emotional responses, mapping relationship dependencies, identifying sources of pride, shame, fear, and ambition. Once this psychological profile was complete, they could engineer situations specifically designed to trigger the responses most advantageous to their purposes. The target would believe they were making free choices based on their own judgment, when in fact they were responding predictably to carefully orchestrated stimuli. The only defense against such sophisticated psychological warfare is the elimination of the vulnerabilities being exploited. This requires identifying and systematically destroying every aspect of character that creates predictable responses to external manipulation. The angry man can be controlled through insults, the prideful man through challenges to his status, the fearful man through threats, the greedy man through offers, the moral man through appeals to principle. Each of these character traits, however positive they might seem in social contexts, becomes a vulnerability in competitive contexts. The transformation process involves what might be called strategic sociopathy, not the pathological inability to feel emotions, but the deliberate choice to feel emotions only when they serve strategic purposes. This allows for the full experience of human feeling while maintaining complete control over when and how those feelings affect behavior. The reconstructed character can access anger when anger serves tactical purposes, fear when fear provides useful information, pride when pride motivates effective action, compassion when compassion builds necessary alliances. But, crucially, none of these emotions operate autonomously. They are tools deployed consciously for specific effects rather than autonomous forces that hijack decision-making processes. This represents a fundamental inversion of the normal relationship between emotion and action. Instead of emotions driving behavior, behavior is driven by strategic calculation that may choose to employ emotions as implementation mechanisms. The practical development of this capability requires systematic desensitization to emotional triggers combined with conscious reassociation of emotional responses with strategic outcomes. The person seeking to become unconquerable must identify their strongest emotional reactions, the things that make them angry, afraid, proud, or sympathetic, and deliberately expose themselves to these triggers until the automatic response patterns are broken down. This process resembles military stress inoculation training, where soldiers are exposed to simulated combat conditions until their panic responses are eliminated and replaced by trained behaviors. The difference is that instead of training for physical combat, this training prepares for psychological combat, the ability to maintain clear thinking and strategic purpose regardless of external pressures or manipulation attempts. The Roman general who conquered Gaul exemplified this principle when he systematically eliminated his emotional responses to battlefield casualties, political betrayals, and personal insults. Where other commanders would be paralyzed by grief, enraged by treachery, or distracted by slights to their honor, he maintained perfect clarity about strategic objectives and tactical requirements. His enemies could not manipulate him emotionally because his emotions no longer operated as autonomous systems vulnerable to external triggers. This emotional invulnerability extends beyond mere psychological defense to become a form of offensive capability. The person who cannot be emotionally manipulated gains enormous advantages in negotiations, conflicts, and competitive situations. While opponents exhaust energy trying to find psychological leverage, the emotionally invulnerable individual operates with complete focus on strategic objectives. This efficiency advantage often proves decisive in extended competitions where stamina and clarity become determining factors. But the destruction of vulnerable character involves more than emotional control. It requires the elimination of moral certainties that can be exploited through ethical manipulation. The person with fixed moral principles can be controlled by anyone sophisticated enough to engineer situations where those principles conflict with survival or success. The truly invulnerable character maintains moral flexibility, the ability to choose ethical frameworks based on strategic requirements rather than inherited or socially imposed moral systems. This does not mean becoming immoral, but rather becoming metamoral, capable of operating within whatever moral framework serves strategic purposes in particular situations. The same individual might operate with rigid honesty in contexts where honesty builds trust and reputation, while employing sophisticated deception in contexts where deception provides tactical advantages. The choice of moral framework becomes a strategic decision rather than an automatic constraint. The merchant prince who dominated Mediterranean trade demonstrated this principle by maintaining reputation for absolute honesty in commercial dealings while simultaneously operating the most sophisticated intelligence network of his era. His commercial honesty was strategically chosen because it provided competitive advantages in an environment where trust was scarce and valuable. His intelligence activities employed deception because information gathering required capabilities incompatible with complete transparency. Both approaches served the same strategic purpose through different means. The psychological integration of these apparently contradictory capabilities requires understanding morality as technology rather than identity. Different moral approaches serve different strategic purposes in different contexts. The ability to choose and deploy appropriate moral frameworks becomes a skill like choosing appropriate tools for different tasks. This moral flexibility becomes possible only after the destruction of fixed moral identity, the part of character that needs to see itself as consistently good or consistently anything other than consistently effective. This destruction of fixed identity extends to all aspects of self-concept that create predictable behaviors. The person who strongly identifies as intelligent can be manipulated through challenges to their intellectual competence. The person who identifies as compassionate can be controlled through appeals to suffering. The person who identifies as successful can be leveraged through threats to their achievements. Any fixed self-concept becomes a handle for manipulation by those sophisticated enough to exploit identity vulnerabilities. The reconstructed character maintains fluid identity, the ability to embody whatever characteristics serve strategic purposes in particular situations while maintaining no fixed attachments to any particular identity. This creates what intelligence agencies call deep covert capability, the ability to become whatever the situation requires so completely that even sophisticated observers cannot detect the performance. But, unlike the pathological fragmentation of multiple personality disorders, this fluid identity operates from a stable strategic core. The various personas are conscious constructions deployed for specific purposes rather than autonomous personalities operating independently. The central controlling intelligence remains constant while surface characteristics shift according to tactical requirements. The culmination of this character reconstruction is the development of what might be called strategic authenticity, the ability to be genuinely whatever the situation requires. This goes beyond mere acting or deception to actual temporary personality modification. The individual becomes capable of generating real emotions, genuine beliefs, and authentic responses that serve strategic purposes, then shifting to entirely different emotions, beliefs, and responses when circumstances change. This capability represents the ultimate form of personal power because it eliminates the final vulnerability, the need to be consistent with previous versions of oneself. The person who has achieved this level of character flexibility cannot be controlled through appeals to their past statements, previous commitments, or established patterns of behavior. They remain free to respond to each situation based purely on its strategic requirements rather than constraints imposed by identity consistency. The weak man is trapped by his need to remain recognizably himself across all situations. This consistency requirement forces predictable responses that sophisticated opponents can exploit systematically. The strong man maintains only strategic consistency, behavior patterns that serve his long-term purposes while remaining tactically flexible in response to changing circumstances. This strategic consistency operates like the keel of a sailing ship, providing stability and direction while allowing the vessel to respond appropriately to changing wind and water conditions. The person who has achieved this integration can navigate any psychological or social environment while maintaining progress toward chosen destinations. They become unsinkable because they retain the ability to adapt to any conditions while never losing sight of their ultimate objectives. The final stage of this transformation involves the integration of all previous capabilities into a unified system of strategic character. The silence that conceals intentions combines with the hunger that drives achievement and the invulnerable character that cannot be conquered to create something unprecedented, a human being optimized for success in any environment, equipped with capabilities that compound over time, immune to the manipulation and destruction that limits ordinary people. This integrated character represents Machiavelli's ultimate vision, not merely the ability to gain power, but the ability to maintain and expand power indefinitely because the source of power lies within rather than depending on external circumstances. Such a person becomes a force of nature rather than merely a participant in political or economic games. They create circumstances rather than merely responding to them, design outcomes rather than merely adapting to them, command reality rather than merely surviving within it. The man who destroys his weak self completely becomes literally indestructible by others because there remains nothing vulnerable for destruction to target. His strength comes not from external resources that can be taken away, but from internal capabilities that grow stronger through exercise. His success creates more success, his power generates more power, his influence expands his influence. He becomes a perpetual motion machine of achievement, limited only by the scope of his strategic vision and the duration of his physical existence. This is the destiny that Machiavelli saw as possible for any individual willing to undertake the complete reconstruction of their character according to strategic principles. It is not granted by birth, luck, or external circumstances, but forged through deliberate effort applied with systematic precision over whatever time period proves necessary. The only question is whether one possesses the vision to see what is possible and the commitment to pay whatever price is required to achieve it.